Hi, Eric. How are you? Hello, everybody. We are here with Eric Robbie.
Really happy to have you as our guest, and so we're going to talk today about NLP. So, Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Good?
I'm good. Yeah, a little cold because it's cold here in my part of England, freezing.
Okay.
But, you know, I'm inside, so I'm good.
So Eric, since perhaps some people may not know you, uh, what is your story about NLP? Because you are, for us, an important figure in the world of NLP. And what is your story about NLP?
Well, I'm one of those people who came to NLP after 8 or 9 years of different kinds of humanistic psychology. And one of the very interesting things when the first books and the first stories came from California about, you know, these two guys, is that there were people like me who had done some TA, some bioenergetics, some co-counseling, some gestalt, some body work, postural integration, and perinatal recapitulation. All of those approaches to psychotherapy that would be outside the conventional medical model. You know, I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world, but 40 odd years ago, if you had a mental problem, you would be referred to a psychologist, but he or she could only work under the guidance of a psychiatrist. Or else, you know, there was also the thing called psychoanalysis. But breaking away from all of that in the 60s and the 70s were various methods or approaches to psychotherapy. And I had been studying some of them. And then along comes this book that suggests that these two researchers have begun to make a meta-analysis of various methods. You know, this one works because it's the same as this one. It's just the process has a different name. Or this one, you know, does reliving, and this one does recapitulation, and this one brings everything to the present, including your memories of the past. And in a way, it was fascinating, but not entirely new, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
But I can remember that there was one bookshop in London run by a friend of mine who had all of the books for all of these approaches and other additional topics, but mainly New Age psychology, humanistic psychology, even stuff that was maybe a little fluffy, you know, people into energy, angels. I think there was a thing called there was a thing you had to read every day. I mean, these are all sort of vaguely related approaches. And my friend Brian Wade, who ran the bookshop, little tiny bookshop, I knew him from various times we'd met before. And he said, you should be interested in this. And it was Frogs into Princes, which, as you know, is one of the first popular books. There were 4 or 5 in the mid 70s, but I think Frogs into Princes is 1979.
I think so, yes.
Possibly.
And it has the merit of being transcripts. Now, I happen to know because I later on worked with Richard Bandler, but I will come to that, I suppose. I know from what he told me that Frogs into Princes is not one 3-day seminar. It's 5 different 3-day seminars, the best bits of, and they are edited together so that, of course, it's all riveting, but I remember taking that book home, and you'd open it, you'd read 2 or 3 pages, and then you'd have to put it down and just think about, oh my God, and as you know, it's all about process. It's all pick it up and read it again, and I thought, well, if there are any classes in this, I'm going to go to them. And that didn't happen in Britain until I think September 1982. But I was one of the people there, in the very first practitioner level training in Britain, starting in September 1982. And it was a good program, because what it did was 1 weekend a month for 8 weekends, plus every midweek, Wednesday midweek in between practice session. So it's quite long by today's standards. I think I added it up to a total of the equivalent of 35 days. Mm-hmm. But and then one of the people who was invited to come and teach on the track that I was taking was Robert Dilts, and he must have looked around the class of 30, 40 people, 35, I think, and noticed who was perhaps better skilled or more lively, or taking up the material and using it in a good way. Because 8 of us got an invite to go to a master practitioner training held in Santa Cruz, put on by Chris Hall and featuring Richard Bandler. And I was, I think, the envy of my friends, because I had enough money to go to it. And I was a freelance journalist at the time, so I could, declare my own holiday, my own time. So I went off and did the master practitioner track, 18 days, I think it was. And that was an eye-opener. And then this, I think, is the interesting part. When I came back, one of my friends, Willie Montero, who, he had other things to do. He wasn't free to go that training, but he did want me to tell him all the things we'd done in the 18 days of master track. And by the way, in those days, there were 2 ways to do a master track. In the Grinder organization and with most of his affiliates, a master track was just taking what was then the agreed practitioner level material and doing it again to be more masterful at it, to have more skill. Mm-hmm. Whereas over, if you like, the other side of the street, because it's both in California, Chris Hall was one of the people developing additional material, additional linguistic material, and of course, this was almost the beginning of Richard Bandler rolling out sub-modalities. He started teaching them a bit in 1981. He thought them up and developed, and experimented a bit more in 82. And by the way, one of the things that is different now is that in those days, if people came up with a new idea and you had a class who came to study what you discovered last year, you could take 1/3 of the time and start experimenting with what you came up this year, so that the students were, if you like, trial subjects, helping you explore. It was understood. It was the culture. If you had new ideas to try out, let's just take a morning to try them out. And not like now, where everything is, known and expected and, guaranteed. But as I said, 1982, 83 was the beginning of really the adventurous explorations in submodalities. And on the 7 days he contributed to the master track, that's all Richard did. And he did some very, very amazing things. One of the things he did is he said, you have to explore, you've probably done this, what are the submodalities of like versus dislike?
Yeah.
And what are the submodalities of happy and relaxed versus depressed? And what's the submodalities between serious and fun? You know, and of course there are differences. The time I realized that I knew Richard was a genius is he came in one morning and decided to do the whole lecture in a very slow, sincere, depressed tonality. And he kept it up for 1 hour and 40 minutes with the instruction to us that if we didn't like that, we were to internally go inside and change the submodalities.
Excellent.
Amazing.
But it was I mean, the whole point of it was, if you're not going to use it, why am I teaching it? You know, if the whole point is this is useful, you should be using it, if not on other people, then on yourself. And I have the tape somewhere. It's the audio tape. It really was a piece of, you know, performance art. You know, you could write home about that one. Anyway, I came back to England and my friend Willie said, what did you learn? And I began to tell him. And he said, right, how about this? You, me, and a couple of others from the course will meet every Monday night at 6 in the evening in my house. And you will take us through the things that you learned for the next 26 weeks. And I can tell you, one of the best ways to learn something is to have to teach it.
Yeah.
You know, even if you didn't know it completely, by the time you listened to, that was the thing. In those days, people made audio tapes. And for this particular training, the house, the organization, the training program had made good audio tapes, which we took home with us. So I could, on Monday afternoon, I could listen to a piece of some of the class, work out what I should be saying, and then teaching Willie and Stephen and a guy called Graham Dawes. So that was my job. That was my sort of role in the group, you know, was to teach them stuff. And this is the interesting part. Because I had done everything already, when they were doing exercises, instead of being bored, I thought, well, I'll give myself something to do, right? Instead of just, oh, I could read a book, you know. I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll see if I can, for example, read these people like a book. And since we'd done a lot of submodality training, I gave myself the task of seeing if I could detect from just their head and face what the submodalities were. And I'd get pretty good feedback quite quickly because, you know, I would guess them, put them in my notebook. And then a few seconds later, Willie would say to Stephen, so is it this or is it this? And then I can go, oh, right, tick, tick, tick. So I very quickly discovered that I had somehow over the time between going off to Santa Cruz, and this was in February 1984, begun to detect the patterns of, and I didn't know this, but nobody else had done this, because it's not so obvious now, but back in 1982, 83 and so on, if you wanted to study NLP, you went to America. And most of the people doing original work and finding out things were in America and other places, you know, Britain, France, Switzerland, Germany, you know, people there were just catching up. You know, the trainers came over and did classes, went home, but there wasn't the sense of anybody in Europe or outside of the United States contributing. We were on the receiving end, you know. But fast forward to 1985, and some very nice people, Ed and Marianne Rees, had decided, they ran a training every summer, a residential, 3 weeks long. The dollar was very good against the pound. They decided that they would bring their summer residential to Europe and also offer it to anybody from Europe who wanted to come along. And they also put out an invitation to, by this time I'd become a master practitioner, and they put out an invite to say, if any of you want to come and be assistants and help us manage the classes, and obviously there may be, although people have got quite good English, occasionally we might need, you know, people who can help. So I think it was 150 people altogether, 90 from Europe, 60 from in and around the southeast of America. On the very first day, practically, they said to the dozen of us who were going to be assistants and who might at the end of it get an associate trainer certificate, they said, okay, well, in addition to helping and assisting, we think that the badge of being a trainer is that you can come up with something. So it was a direct invitation to contribute, you know, what have you got, you know, and oh gosh, so there's 12 people and they go around, you know, and different people are suggesting this and that, you know, and some of it was interesting, some of it was true, but maybe small scale, you know, that you could draw a 4-panel quadrant that when people were doing psychotherapy and working either in the present or the past and talking about painful versus pleasant, that the 2 squares out of 4 that people went into were past unpleasant. You know, in other words, it's an interesting observation that not enough going back into the past was to recover good stuff. Anyway, they go around the room and they get to me and I say, well, I don't know, but I've got this small thing. I don't know quite what to do about it, but it seems to be fun. And I said, it's reading sub-modalities. And I can remember Ed Rees and Robert Dilts looked at me and said, what, like Steve Andreas teaches? And I said, I don't know. What does Steve Andreas teach? And they went, well, you know, when you lean back, it's because it's bigger. Yeah, so that's posture. And if you lean back and lift your chin, that's brighter. And I went, oh, no, it's not like that. It's not body. It's all in and around here. And it's not one thing at a time. It's 8, 9, 10, 12 sub-modalities, the major ones, all at once. In fact, when you get good, you can just do that and get the whole set. And they looked at me like in disbelief, you know, and they said, you can do that? And I went, yeah. And they're like, okay, teach it. And the idea was that someplace in the timetable of the 3 weeks, 1985, June, July, August, June, July, I would be given an evening class, and whoever wanted, you know, they'd put up a sign-up thing. It like in American schools, you know, who wants to sign up for this class? Who wants to sign up for that class? Well, they said, you know, you can have whoever wants to come to it. And I think I had about 7 or 8 days to work out from what I could do without knowing how I was doing it to being able to communicate it to other people. Anyway, I did. It worked. I think the first time I got the whole job done in 108 minutes, which is moving right along, you know, and it became the talk of the training. You know, I think 38, 40 people went out and said, what did you do today? You know, and told everybody. So the next thing I knew, they said, oh, you have to do it again. Because there's a whole bunch of people who missed it, but they want to, you know, so while you're here, could you do it again? And that really started me being a trainer in NLP, because the next thing is that I did the same thing in 1986, and then Marianne Rees decided to hire me to teach that class in America. And there are somewhere on YouTube, there are a couple of little clips of me teaching in Florida in February 1987. I mean, what Marianne did that was very efficient, you know, what she did is split the cost of the airfare by having me teach the class in Florida one weekend, and then the next weekend staying with them, but traveling up to New Jersey, because they used to live in New Jersey before they moved to Florida, and they still ran trainings there from time to time. So who should come along to the training in New Jersey but Wyatt Woodsmore, who you've probably heard of. At the time, Wyatt had a very interesting brief. He was, if you remember, in the 70s and the 80s, however strange the general public might have thought things like remote viewing are, or you know, putting psychic pressure on somebody, the American military considered it seriously worth studying. I think their argument was, the Russians are studying it, we might as well find out if there's anything in it, you know. But you know, I guess they had concerns about sending a serving personnel off to courses where conceivably they might not be entirely 100% effective when they came back. They might be even better, but they might not. But it would be worth hiring a civilian who can sign the affidavit, I take the risks, you know. In fact, they couldn't have picked a better person to send, because Wyatt Woodsmore, who I've become a friend of, is both very perceptive, very intelligent, willing to try things, but very stable and grounded. You know, so he's the sort of person who would come out of experimental things okay. And at that point, Wyatt and Tad James had been given the task of running Richard Bandler's trainer trainings each year. And he didn't tell me this. In fact, he came to the class in New Jersey, just attended like a regular person. And at the end of it, came up and identified himself and said, would I like to come to the trainer training in August 1987 to teach what I'd just been teaching in New York. And I said, sure, you know, I'll do it. And then that's it, really. Richard said when he saw me the second time, because I don't think, we talked a few times in 1983, but it wasn't, you know, in great depth. But he made a point of watching the tapes that were being made of me teaching I don't know where the copies are, but I know there are copies somewhere, in 1987. And he decided that at the end of the trainer training in 87, that he would hand me a trainer certificate. I like to tell the story because I don't know if it's good or bad, but I was a little bit like in Wayne's World, you know, I was a little bit not quite sure if I knew enough. I thought trainers should maybe know more than I did. So I did my, we're not worthy, you know, you know, from Wayne's World, you know, we're not worthy, I'm not good enough. And I can remember what Richard said. He said, listen, anybody who can come up with that and can come into a room full of people and teach it to them is a trainer, believe me. So that was it. And then the Wyatt and Tab invited me to the next trainer training, the 88, and to the next one in 1989. And somewhere around, I think, November 1988, Richard called me up and said, I've decided to run my own practitioner tracks and I want you to come and co-teach with me.
Wow.
You know, I mean, well, it was a good reason because what his assistant Beverly said was, you'll be there all the time and you'll be ready to go on any time that Richard's supposed to go on but can't. So there won't be any blank spaces in the training. In addition, you'll also have your own slots where you're meant to be presenting. And in return for this, we'll give you X $1,000. And at the time, I kept thinking to myself, I'd have done it for nothing. Or even just, you know, not quite the money they offered. But anyway, that was it. I began a run of doing trainings, co-teaching with and for Richard Bandler.
Wow.
And it was, we had a lot of fun. You know, we did some interesting things, just again, for the hell of it. You know, there were all the things we were supposed to teach, and occasionally we'd throw in extra things just to, you know, just to challenge people. So that's me, really, you know, and I continued to and began to teach for other people over the years. Usually, they don't always ask me in to do beginner stuff, although sometimes I think that's a good place to start. You know, I think we'll get on to talking about sensory acuity, but sub-modality accessing is one part of sensory acuity. There's a whole range of stuff. I think I've maybe added one or two more big pieces, but even just ordinary, somehow there's something, well, I know about this because I found that later on when, and it's one of the things I think is a shame, as trainings have got shorter in time, I remember I said the training I went on was 35 days worth. Mm-hmm. By the time you added all the practice. And there used to be a time when trainings were 3 weeks, 18 days. One of the things that helped that at the time was an understanding in American employment law, which is that any time that you take off from work in order to learn something in the furtherance of your trade professional career was tax deductible. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if you signed up for a course, nowadays they talk about continuous professional education, don't they? Or in-service training, or, you know, while you're employed by this or that hospital, you get 2 weeks paid leave. So you get paid, but you also get the fees and you also get course credits. And at the end of it, it can add up to a piece of paper, some certificate. I mean, I don't know if it's still true, but in the 80s, you could work in America towards a Master's of Social Work or a PhD in this way. You could get 2 days there and 2 days here, and by adding it all up, this or that college or certifying body would say, fine, you've shown diligence and so on. So back in the day, the cost of doing a 3-week training, travel, hotels, whatever the training cost, you could deduct all that from your tax liability. But I think that with shorter trainings, not enough time is spent on basic sensory acuity, not even the detailed stuff. And I don't know any other way around that other than doing add-on classes. For a while, a guy called Chris Morris had me doing that. It was an interesting task because what I'd have preferred days with people, weeks. But if the task was you've only got 2 days, how far can you get in 2 days? And mostly I sorted through the notes I had to find the most effective exercises. And then for 2 days, we would do just those. So there weren't any warm-ups and there weren't any, when you're training, sometimes you need to give people a break or you need to lower the speed and let people relax. In athletics, they talk about warm-up and then they talk about warm down, and then they talk about rest. Well, in the 2 days, there was no warm down and there was no rest. But hopefully we would get a lot done. There are still some people around the world doing longer trainings. It's partly a commercial thing. The move towards shorter trainings, I think, started in 1993. A guy called Tad James made a point of tape recording the didactic bits, the talking to the class bits of some of his trainings. He was one of those people who, by and large, in the didactic bits, said the same thing to each group. I'm not always in favor of that. I think sometimes you come out and look at this group and go, okay, the normal thing isn't going to work. We need to do something different.
Yes.
Yeah. I've even done the thing where you come out and go, what would you like to know? And start from the questions, that you get from what people would like to know. But Tad decided as a marketing ploy to offer what was then on cassette tapes. You remember the little cassette tapes, 90 minutes?
Yes.
You could buy 20 of those for $600. And it was a lot of, if you like, the didactic input, not too much of the exercises. And you could study that at home. Equally, if you had bought the $600 worth and came to one of his residential classes 6 days, which is 72 hours, I suppose, then that would be where the practice was done, or some of it. And at the end of that, he would give you a certificate, notionally as good as if you'd been 12 days or if you'd been 18 days, And I thought that the rest of the field at that point were idiots, because faced with this marketing move, they gave in. they decided, oh, we don't want to lose market share. We don't want more people going to his training and not coming to our training anymore. What we should tell people is, that's not a training. You know, I even, because I used to work in advertising, I said, look, it's very simple. You have two photographs. One photograph, you have a very nice brand new Porsche. It's got shining bodywork and it's got, you know, everything you need. And beside it, you put a chassis with 3 wheels and a steering wheel. And you put, this is our training. This is their training. It doesn't have all that you need, right? It can just about get you there with 3 wheels. I mean, but that's using a thing in advertising called making the point visually and thematically. And you could have reinforced the message in other ways, but you could have said, you know, the vital part of all trainings is the exercises you do in class. Okay, you know, back in the day, there was the almost standard format, which is, you know, 20 minutes of didactic input, then set up the exercise, then go do the exercise, then come back and debrief the exercise, take any questions, and then add a closing comment or two. And then that would be 90 minutes.
Yeah.
That would take you from 10 in the morning to 10:30, 9 in the morning to 10:30, break, come back, another 90 minutes. And, but, you know, for all that it became a kind of routine, the putting together of the exercise and the doing and the making the realizations and then having them confirmed is what makes it a training. Yeah. If you separate, I mean, it's like when I first taught NLP, we didn't have the presuppositions. They're just about being created. I think in 1985, 86, some Americans decided to form an association. There was already the society, which is another thing, but this was going to be just an association of people who were interested. And they decided to come up with membership criteria. And the first rule of the association, it wasn't quite like the first rule of Fight Club, you know, you do not talk about Fight Club. It was the first thing about the association is that you agree with the following 7 behavioral presuppositions. Now, a behavioral presupposition, what does that mean? Well, it's a description of what people expect, you know, like people are making the best decision available to them in their model of the world. You know, it's a platitude. It's a, you know, it's an interesting way to think about it, but it's a description that's self-evident. You know. Anyway, if you want, I'll dig up. I've got a copy of those first 7 tucked away somewhere.
Absolutely.
My way of teaching was not to come out and say, here's a bit of paper. This is what we're going to arrive at. These are the presuppositions. By the way, people went from 7 to 8 to 9 to, you know, I've seen lists of 20, you know. I've seen people add anything, you know, crazy stuff. I mean, I've seen people call it a presupposition of NLP. The work of this guy. Can you see that? It's Albert Mehrabian.
Okay.
He's the guy who did experiments back in 1960, 61 about what convinced people. If they were in 2 minds about something, and then they resolved the uncertainty, what convinced you? And 55% of them said, oh, I saw something visual. 38% said, oh, I heard something in the advertising, and only a few others convinced by other reasons. And that's the origin of that daft statistic about communication is 55, 38, and 7, right? No, it was one narrow experiment or two, right? Designed to, it was what you could do in those days because they didn't have too many. He was an unusual psychologist, but he was creating a field for himself. What convinced people about advertising, or what convinced people when they were in two minds and they were uncertain, right? That's a very narrow context.
Yes.
It's not about all communication.
Yeah.
It's about decision-making.
Mm-hmm.
But it started to be bandied around, trotted out and given to people because an academic said it. So academic research shows, and right. And it's got numbers. It's got illusion of the certainty, right? Forget the context. It's got numbers. So in much the same way that that's, I think, the wrong thing to teach. I know I saw printed one time when we began to get shared material, somebody had included the Morabian bad idea as a presupposition of NLP. Now, I never learned them first. And in all my classes, it's very hard to do this now because there's so much written material, but I'd set it up so that people had the experience in the exercise. And just when they're beginning to work it out, that's when you say, so you see, the meaning of what you say is the response you get. And you offer the realization at the point when people need to become aware of it, not before and not after, but you tie it into the learning. And, nowadays everybody's got copies of this and that on their website, and I don't know if it helps people learn. That's the first time we were exposed to sleight of mouth. I think we spent a total of 3 days on it back in 1983. Robert was still developing it. The handout sheet he gave was his own first hand-drawn version, and some people have gone on to play around with sleight of mouth and add to it. There's the world of submodalities grew. I think in 1983 we had basically, the thing called mapping across wasn't a change technique. It was just a piece of discovery. The one where you have experience A, experience B, what's the difference, what's the similarity, and especially what's the one that, we had an interesting thing that I don't see done much anymore, which is I go from my understanding to somebody else's confusion to their understanding.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, the point about that is I'm going to wind up, without realizing it, to a different understanding. But I mean, that's actually interesting because, it should create, if you do it often enough, a very flexible mindset in one's self. But I think in 83, 84, we had maybe 3 or 4 submodality change techniques and 3 or 4 exploration methods, and that was it. And we've added quite a few since. You could say that sometimes a casual observation by one person generates a whole, let's see what else we can do with this. I know that I co-taught with Richard for 3 or 4 years, and then again the market changed. There was maybe a bit of a recession in some countries, particularly in America. People weren't willing to spend 3 weeks worth of money on a training, so Richard did a couple of years where he only did guest spots on other people's training, or a training that lasted only a week. And, he didn't particularly need my help on those. But other people did. So, we stayed in touch, obviously. But occasionally, if he was in London, I'd pop along to see him. And, he'd start talking about keeping up. Was I keeping up? And I did tease him one time when he started talking about keeping up. I said, sure, what do you need to know? But as you may know, somewhere in the middle there, Richard talked to somebody who, not everybody does this, but some people, their internal kinesthetics for emotion they rotate. Well, they don't quite rotate, but you can make them rotate. And then you can actually speed them up. Now, that's actually a form of kinesthetic construct. And one of the things I've found over the years is that kinesthetic construct is, it's almost like 2/3 of the population can't do it very well. When we did, for instance, when we did submodality work back in the 80s, you would maybe go for the whole visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. One of the things that I did that I think is helpful is there was a list at the time that you were supposed to ask, or you could ask, of visual submodalities, which are 31 items on the list. And I looked at that and I thought, well, by the time you get to the bottom, they'll be bored or they'll have changed something. So I decided that, rightly or wrongly, 8 of them were primitive, were prime, and that the others could be made out of those. So that, for example, shimmering is brightness with a time clock on it. And you can tell shimmering from the outside, but first you have to learn to recognize brightness. So, so I sort of, and the same with auditory and kinesthetic. So I was quite early on, I said, look, you only need to get these 8, and you've probably got enough to work with. And the point about that is you can get through them quite quickly. Even if you're asking verbally and waiting for a verbal response, you can get through them quite quickly. Same with auditory. I think we're back to 7 plus or minus 2, which 7 plus 2 is 9. And, with kinesthetic, you're back to, again, 7 plus 2, 9. But here's the interesting thing. How many people can do to a whole range of exploration all of the 9 major kinesthetic submodalities? Do they have enough internal experience, easygoingness, freedom, lack of barriers, training? And it does seem to me that unless they are already an athlete or a dancer or somebody who does yoga or somebody who's done a lot of, the kinds of body work where you put pressure on with the knuckles or the elbow, Ida Rolf, postural integration, what's her name? There's a few more that involve loosening up the body. Unless people have been through something like that, they don't always have. So for example, back in 1983, I remember being given the task of creating a kinesthetic swish. Now, if you think about it, you've got to find at the one and the same time, the 8 or 9 kinesthetics of the present state, the 8 or 9 kinesthetics of the desired state, and hold them in awareness at the same time. And then find, and we were always taught that you don't do a swish with just one carrier. Well, there may be a carrier. I used to argue that the one that was easiest to spot wasn't the one that always the one that produced the most change. And people looked at me like, what? And I said, well, you can tell because the one that's easiest to do starts happening faster and sooner than the convincer. So that from the outside, if you can see from the outside, you can actually see the driver and the convincer happening at slightly different rates. But that presupposes you can see them. But the reason that I brought up kinesthetics in general is that, again, I think that in the same way as going to somebody else's understanding is an exploration for self, one of the things that you would want to do is to have people take on other people's kinesthetics and physiology. One way to do it is by deep trance identification. You know, the Milton method. You know, Milton Erickson would get people to just go into deep trance identification. And that works if you can get them into that child state, because most deep trance identification is a child state. And so you need to be able to access that. If you can't get them to that state, then you can say, go on, do your DTI, deep trance identification, and it won't be very successful. So again, you're looking for different ways to do the same thing. One of the things, if you remember, that was created by Ed Reese somewhere around the late 80s, it popped up in the, in Not Using Your Brain, but what was the one after that? No, Using Your Brain, was it? The second sub-modality book that was just sub-modalities. Change Your Mind and Keep the Change, I think it is. And chapter 9 or 10, Ed Reese had come up with a way of getting person A to internally change their sub-modalities so that they had the same internal experience as someone who'd taken this or that drug without themselves having taken this or that drug. So they could get the experience by changing the sub-modalities without the actual chemical. Now, again, what to me that says is, well, you're going to find that easier to do if they find changing their kinesthetics easy.
So I'm very curious. So this kinesthetic swish, what did it look like ultimately? Because you said you were supposed to create one. I'm very curious.
Well, if I said to you, for example, if you can think of a pleasant state, what would that be for you? Okay. Now, there isn't much kinesthetic going on right now, but if you would allow yourself to do the kinesthetic, there you go. Something around your back. There's a feeling around your back where the ribs are. And it's warm as well as pressure, is that right? And something in your lower arms, which is tingling, and some movement in your legs and feet. So we've got tingling, we've got movement, we've got warmth, we've got pressure. Okay. Now that's just 4 out of 9. Your shoulders feel lighter. So there's a sort of lifting up. So there's less pressure in your shoulders. Is that right? How am I doing? Okay. Now, I can do that from the outside because I've practiced. But the next part would be, we could go very methodically and go through them one by one to find the driver. But I've spent time taking a punt at what the driver is without asking all the way through it. So I think it's the two things are the feeling in the back of the ribs and the lightness in the shoulders. One is driving the other. I think it's the back is driving the shoulders, but the shoulders are the convincer. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we do the same. we did the same with a desired state. Okay. And obviously the thing you're going to find with a lot of people when you're doing a swish, remember it got its name from the speed. The idea in visual was that it's, yes, it happens so fast that it almost makes that noise. You know, that's I mean, if you like, it's a comic book expression. You know, in comic books, when somebody got in Batman, you know, they even made it in the films. You'd see, and then the screen would say splat, yeah, you know, or biff, or whew, you know, and those would be the noises that in the comic book told you something was happening. And the word swish is one of those onomatopoeic words, a word that it may not even have a meaning in itself, but it sounds like something that the ear would hear. So typically with a kinesthetic swish, once you've elicited the two, hopefully the one driver and the one convincer, but you might end up with two convincers, you know, one for negative, one for positive. You're going to see if they can change quickly, because you're probably not going to get them to begin with, all right? More than likely, what you would do is you'd say, look, see my hands, and you'd make a visual leading and matching. You'd say, I want you to associate that feeling with this, okay? And then you'd watch to see the rate of it and move your hand, like pacing and leading for everything else, you know, pacing, breathing, you know. I mean, the number of times, you know, when you're teaching that you don't always want to match the demo subject, but you want to show the class how easy it is. You know, you a demo subject and you do this, right? And you go, watch my hand, because this is one part of the equation that's very easy to see. Yeah. You know, sometimes when you're teaching, you have to kind of move aside the difficult bits and focus on the two easy bits, or rather the one easy bit and the one bit you want to tie to the easy bit. So, you know, this is the one where you know, and you know, the other one, which is that somebody's not sure if it's working. So you put a hand on the shoulder and then you take the weight off and let them feel the shoulder push. Yeah. Right. So you're saying, now, do you notice the shoulder's moving? It's moving your hand up and down. Ooh. You know, so in the same way as you do that for a demo or for coaching, you can look at somebody and say, all right, the kinesthetic that's happening here and the kinesthetic that's happening here, all right, I want you to do this with them. And then you lead by, you know, now you can also do it with tonality. You know, you can, that's going to be a little harder if you can do two tones at the same time. But that would be, I mean, that was the good state, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah. We won't go into the bad state. We'll just, you know, you amplify that one. But by the way, the everything that we talk about, you can, of course, you can do them by asking questions and, you know, is it this, is it this, is it bright or is it dim? The point about what I teach people to do is it just makes work a little more fun. It can go a little quicker. It can help convince people that you understand them. But I've always said, look, if at any point you're not getting it, it's not quite clear, it's not, you're not 100% certain, well, you can stop. You've got the asking alternative. It's not, these are not, you always have to do it this way. It's, if you're not sure, ask, you know. You'll get better, but the main thing is to get the sub-modalities right, so that the technique you apply, the method you apply, will work. And that's still always going to be which one's the driver, which one's the convincer.
So there's some kind of mix between mind reading and calibration.
Yes.
And how do you find the proper line between too much mind reading, or how can you really put the switch in the right place?
Okay. When I first started teaching the sub-modality calibration, I didn't have the answer, but one of the things I came up with is an observation, which is that there's not just one self-talk that goes on inside of people, auditory dialogue, we used to say. There are actually several versions. And I've written about this. I can certainly send you a 2,000-word paper on this. Or I can put it up on, well, we can put it up on, I've got it in PDF. How I came to the notion that you can look at people's self-dialogue and classify it in 6 or 7 different ways, with more or less importance, with more or less self-involvement. But then there's, I picked the number 7 because, you know, keep it nice and simple. There are 6 levels of, or types of thinking, which we call internal dialogue. And then there's the one where there isn't any. And I think that for all of these observation tasks, you do better when you're in what I call wondering, which is a complete absence of all auditory dialogue. And you can practice getting into it. There are 1 or 2 shortcuts. There's one that I happily tell a class how to do. I know it's out there on the internet now. I can tell you about it, and I can tell you something about its limitations. The simplest method to acquire this state is to put your tongue behind, not quite touching.
We lost you a little bit. Can you repeat?
Just the last sentence.
Just
yes.
Okay. All right. You put the tip of your tongue just behind your top teeth.
Okay.
Close, but not quite touching. Ambiguous. Now, you should find the muscles here relax, and the internal dialogue turns off.
Oh.
And you may find wanting to come back, but again, it's a matter of keeping that ambiguous. The drive to talk to yourself can be quite strong. Okay, because it's one of the ways we make sense out of the world, but it's not the only way. All right. Now, that is a handy thing, you know, and I first noticed it actually long before I did any kind of alternative psychology. I first noticed that back when I was at university studying philosophy and psychology. And I made the observation that self-talk could be useful, you know, but sometimes you wouldn't want to do it. But it turns out I haven't been the only person who's noticed this. I think it turns up in quite a few yoga traditions. So you'll find, if you go back far enough, you know, this or that yoga teacher has mentioned it. And if they've written down, or a pupil has written down their methods, you know, it's available. But I have to tell you that, I mean, when I found it, it really was a surprise to me. Now, it works, but here's the thing. You can keep doing it and it'll work. And then after about 3 days, it stops working. Your mind learns how to override it.
Okay.
Now, what it's good for is communicating the state that helps to be in, so that you don't mind read, or you mind read less. Okay.
Okay.
There are some other things, by the way, to do with being sure of what you're seeing. Typically, the task is to practice doing enough not interpreting, so that it becomes less and less of an attraction. There's an interesting interview came out only a week or two ago. An American neuroscientist called Lisa Feldman Barrett is saying what I think I've been saying for 30 odd years, which is that a lot of the time people are very tempted to get what they're seeing right. Mm-hmm. And the brain will actually, if you're not careful, if you go into a situation wanting to be right, because that's what children are taught to be in school, you know, what's the right answer? What's the right answer? You know, I mean, not only there, but there's a lot of presentation of self. You know, one doesn't want to go into a meeting as an adult in a business context and be the one who doesn't know. You know, there are pressures on having the right answer. There are pressures on being the one who is sure. Okay, being unsure and being, well, giving up wanting to be right is the beginning of noticing what's actually there. It won't, you know, this, the paradox for some of this work, I mean, there are times when NLP talks about observation and it tells you what to look for. A lot of the whole body work came out of, I remember picking up the book by Frank Puselic and his friend Byron Lewis. I think first published in the 80s. I think it's been reprinted. Frank Puselic and some of the people he was working with then, including Richard Bandler, had identified some of the grosser movement things that go with rep systems. Mm-hmm. You know, I can remember the first chart that he put up, he and Byron Lewis. Those are so obvious that it's hard to be wrong about them. Mm. Okay, you know, so if you start saying, well, you know, telephone posture, as if you're talking on the telephone, this is so gross. There's no, it's not like there's a subtle movement. You know, this is, when I say gross, I don't mean like the Americans saying, oh, that's so gross. You know, gross meaning big, you know. You speak French and also some German?
Yes, a little bit.
A little bit. Well, when I was in Switzerland, I spoke when I had to the the Swiss Deutsch, which I think is particularly in and around St. Gallen and the north part. Is that where the Swiss Dutch is?
Yes.
Whereas on the south border, there are crossovers from the Swiss to the Italian. Is that right? Because it was interesting. I would get asked to teach in northern Italy, and I was always very curious. That reminds me, by the way, I had one time where I was talking about don't waste an opportunity. The first time that I went to teach in Italy, in Udine, in those days, they didn't have the little broadcast thing with tiny circuits in them and the little headphones. The way that you taught a class, a 2-day class would take 4 days, because I would be on stage and beside me would be a very talented and flexible translator. Yeah. And I would have to divide up what I was going to say into 2 or 3 sentences, and I would say them, and then the translator would say them, and then I'd say the next bit. And I thought it was a good way to spend my time, was to say something, and then while the translator was saying it, I'd watch what the response was.
Yeah.
So that, right, okay. So again, that's just, if you're going to be in that context, then you can use it, I hope. But in terms of mind reading versus calibration, it really all comes down to you keep putting yourself in the state where you're not interpreting, and you're completely curious, and you can build up to, as I said, with the going into other people's understanding. You can also do what I remember what I was told, which is just, it'll come back to me in a minute. The Todd Epstein used to say, pretend you've got a little cartoon character on your shoulder that he called the Nurk character. And the job of the Nurk character was to keep saying, "Are you sure?" He had a phrase about science fiction and being shown around, somebody showing a man from space around on Earth, and what is that? It's a cow. Oh, right. So it's a brown cow on this side, meaning that on the bit that you can see, it's brown. You don't know what the other bit is, and I think it's to use one of Richard's phrases, it's attitude, it's practice, it's losing your internal dialogue, it's becoming convinced that eventually you'll see what's really there. The thing is to just get out of your own way, because I don't mind being wrong. I think the greatest thing you can be is wrong, because hence the expression, there is no failure. Well, I mean, of course, in real life there is sometimes failure. If you don't pay your taxes on time, then anyway, we've sort of come to a gap Is there anything that from what I've said that you want to follow up on?
Yeah, for me, there is one thing that attracts my attention. When we talk about calibration, I saw in some videos with you that you can see, for example, on the face of people, some color tonalities according to the images that people make
Yes.
inside. How can you make perhaps the difference between what you can see and the impact that could be in the environment? Because, for example, let's imagine that the skin actually generates some taints of color according to what you're thinking of. If, for example, right now I move my eyes to I don't know, a blue object, it's very possible that this blue color will have an impact on my mind, unconsciously or not.
Well, there is one clip. I mean, when I taught in Florida in February 1987, I hadn't actually taught sub-modality work and eye accessing in a whole 2-day class. I'd up to that point, I'd taught it at most in 2 or 3 hours. And so I remember saying to Ed and Marianne, well, we're going to have to make up some of it as we go along. Okay, we'll do various things to prepare, and we'll explore this and we'll explore that. Because of that, I didn't have written down a pre-planned order of events. I didn't even know they were going to videotape it. So, and you know, my emphasis is always, these are the people who've primarily paid to come and learn something. These are the people that they're my obligation, they're my duty. So I didn't even have time to go up to the cameraman and say, when you get to this bit, do this, or focus in. So it was luckily that a few times he did take it upon himself to zoom in. And those are 2 or 3 of the clips that are up on YouTube. Now, normally with a class, I would do pretty much the same, but just do the close work for longer. One of the variables is actually distance. So I mean, I can see things at 20 meters because I made it, again, one of my fun challenges for myself. You know, people used to say to me, how do you teach the same class over and over? I go, I never teach the same class over and over. Yeah. I even though like to, you know, I remember when I was developing this stuff, I'd go out and see if I could read the person in the front row, 1.5 meters, 2 meters. And then next time, can I read the one behind him? And then the next time, the one behind her, you know. And somewhere in Richard Bandler's bunch of tapes from 89, 87, 88, 89, you could see me reading somebody in the back row of the audience who is 66 rows away. Okay. Now, the point about that is that I think skill comes from taking risks, but also it comes from gradual development. And some of what you're asking would be done in a class through gradual development and getting people to more readily see. But the changes that you're talking about are actually pretty fast. Again, I think I put up on, well, I did want to verify some of what I discovered. I went along to a British university about 20 years ago and said, can I pay to take a postgraduate course? Because I'll certainly come and do whatever you need to satisfy a postgraduate course, but I'd like to do an experiment, and I'd like you to oversee it, supervise it, and then I'd like you to say everything that this experiment comes up with genuinely happened, and then we can put it in the journal. And they said no. And I went, why? And they said, well, you know, we don't do that. We'd be happy to assign you the experiment that we once studied, that some of our senior people think, or you can join in, you know, I mean, academic psychology has all its own rules, you know. There's the rule where nowadays you have to submit all of your experiment first to a committee who decide if it's ethical, if it's going to harm anybody, is it, I don't know, even politically correct, you know, and the idea that you might just say, look, this is what I think's going on. Can I have you guys help me confirm it? And they just, and it may have been that I didn't dress like I wanted to be a student. You know, it may have been that I didn't look like a slightly scruffy, you know, the sort of dress that university people wear, you know. In Britain, it used to be a jacket with leather patches on the elbows, you know, or intellectual. And but the changes that you're asking about, some of them happen very quickly. Now, that's not to say that that should make it easier to spot. It's much more to do with the well, there's the notion that the change may have to be, I more than once have said to the subject, can you make that more intense? Because the class, bless them, are not seeing it. Now, what I gather from modern, and this is the other part about modern theories of perception, you will be surprised how fast your brain keeps slipping in the previous picture, the one in which nothing happens. Because there was a paper in 2018, which says that for some of what we see, you're looking at a composite that was put together and doesn't change, well, only changes about every 15 seconds. Now, mine changes a lot faster than that. I have a joke that I tell some of my students, that if, for example, there's any money on the ground, I will see it. You know, if there's a coin has been dropped, I will see it. So I've become somebody who's out here is unusual. I actually think it's the way that people were before civilization came along, or before education. Again, what we're talking about is not doing the things that make it difficult to see, as opposed to what do I do? It's what do I not do? Okay. Usually, you know, there's also an element of fun. I mean, God knows, I've been to enough classes where things are far too serious, and my you know, we fool around. You know, we play. We do the one where, you know, there's a coin in this hand but not in this hand, and then you put them behind your arms. You know, it could be one, it could be the other, and then you come out, and within 5 questions, the person has to be able to tell which hand the coin's in. You've done that one?
No.
No.
I learned it from Robert Dilts, but it's, again, it's a little bit of, there's a serious point to it, which is that the person's always making responses, and if you can read the responses, you can guess which hand the coin is in. But you know, it's enjoyable. You know, learning shouldn't be.
What kind of questions would you ask? Would you ask questions related to the coin, or other just random questions?
Robert Dilt generated and used to give out a list of 10 questions. The first 5 were all to do with what you might call usual NLP. Like you might make it a point to get into rapport, so that you made sure that you were doing all the rapport things. And then you'd lean in and say, no, be honest with me, which hand is it in, right? And people are going to be more likely to tell you if they're in rapport with you. Or another one would be the startle response, where you go, it's in the hand. And usually, not always, you might get the person going, wait a minute. And so you'd actually see the hand that it's in worry about dropping it, and the muscles would tense up. So those would be fairly obvious ways to play the game. I mean, the best way to play the game is to actually play the game. With the some classes, I'd get people to attempt the guess 2 or 3 times before giving them the handy hints, because that way they might discover some of the handy hints themselves. You know, then the second 5 of the questions that Robert Dilts generated in his handout were more subtle. They were things, you know, things that involved a kind of internal process, part of which would be double checking where the thing is. And so if you can invite people, I can't remember them all. You might, for instance, start a conversation that's confusing and hope to lead the person into confusion. And then the only way they can solve the confusion is to do some behavior that tells themselves what's happening, which you spot. So they were a lot more hypnotic. What's very interesting is I've seen on the internet 2 or 3 people who are, sometimes they're called stage magicians. There's a subcategory of stage magic called mentalism. And it's a generic word for various things to do with, I mean, I've watched a few of these guys. Some of them have even come to my class. And most of the time they're picking up one or other little bit of tiny behavior. But you can find, I think there's a video somewhere on the internet of an English magician called Darren Brown. And he does, I think, bits of the coin guessing game. I don't think he does it the whole way through, and he doesn't explain what he's doing. And I've recently, well, this year, or maybe last year, I saw somebody else do it. Again, you know, very hit and run, you know, very much like young men show off. And there's a whole, I don't know, interest group, people who, for instance, the way that you can approach girls and begin a conversation in order that you might invite them into a relationship, sometimes called pick artist. There's 1 or 2 people saying, well, have something like this as your opener, as your introduction. So this is how you go along and, you know, playfully, or just to be a little bit show off, a little bit
surprising.
Yeah. And they've picked up on some of these games and routines. But I'll dig out the list for later. You know, but it is, as I said, all credit to that goes to Robert, who he did actually say something which I thought was a nice challenge to the group when we did it. He said, obviously, if you keep going and ask 20 questions, you'll probably get there. If not, because the person goes, oh God, and you know, is ready to give up. But you should be able to get the answer within 5 questions. So if you set yourself the target of being able to, you know, I don't have a tape of it, although I gather a tape exists, but I think the first class I taught in Udine in 1988 was videotaped. And I was teaching that piece of sensory acuity plus a bunch of other things. And they videotaped it. And I don't have a copy. But somewhere I know that they then used it in Italy to show people what can be done. So I don't know if I should maybe, as well as searching English language parts of YouTube, I could maybe see if it's available in Italian. I mean, I think that, as I said earlier, being able to read stuff, calibrate, if you like, it makes life easier. It gives you verification, because if they both say it and perform it or demonstrate it, then, you know, they're being really honest with you. So it helps, okay? It may even be that you can save time. And those are all good uses. If you're doing it for entertainment, well, you know, you better be good. I did a class in Poland. What's the second biggest city in Poland?
There is Wrocław, perhaps. It's it's the big one.
Begins with C. It's on the tip of my tongue. One of the things we did, because I think I did 8 or 9 different exercises, each with a point, and then I brought with me a videotape made of channel 4, showing the magician, as I said, Darren Brown, working. And we went through it, showing the class that what they just learned was the thing that Brown had done in his TV show, one of the 3 TV shows, so that they could see it being done slightly differently. Because I suppose one of the things you want to be able to do is to, any of these methods, you need to be able to apply them in different contexts. You know, the world won't always give you the same context. You know, I've had people say to me, the things you describe, does it make any difference whether the person's wearing glasses or isn't wearing glasses? And the answer is no. Once you learn there's a structure to what I teach that underlies the ability to sort out a lot of information at high speed. So it's not, can you pick one thing from 7 things? It's, can you, I mean, if I was to say to you that each of the major visual submodalities, each of the 8 major visual submodalities, the ones that I call major, has 4 or 5 behaviors that go with it. One of the things that says is you don't have to see all 5 of them. If you get 4 of them, you're on a good thing. It's also possible that number 4 in brightness is also the same as number 4 in something else. okay? If you were only looking for that on its own, you could get confused. So part of what you're doing is simultaneously sorting for sameness and difference. So again, if you haven't got those meta programs really relaxed, you may have, you know, difficulty. The one thing I haven't said, by the way, is that, but I did mention it to you when we were speaking on Friday. One of the things I've noticed when teaching sensory acuity and particularly sub-modality eye accessing, sub-modality ear accessing, sub-modality everywhere else accessing. The E stands for eye, ear, or everywhere else. Okay, I had to make it work somehow. But typically between 8 and 10%, even though they do the whole installation sequence, they don't get very good at it. And I don't know why that is. They just, it doesn't work. I do know that about 8% of males have one form of color blindness, the most common form, red and green. There are other forms of color blindness, but they're not quite so frequent. But that seems to be something hardwired. The difficulty is simply not, you know, they just don't register. And it's possible that, and usually what I, nowadays, once I discovered this ratio of 8% not quite getting it, I would try to identify them early on in the class. So that if the class was 2 days, then by lunchtime of the first day, I could, you know, or the promoter could take them by the elbow and say, look, in our experience, you're not going to get it. And rather than have you spend all of the time and feel cheesed off, you know, here's your money back. And it's not just to make our numbers look good, although that always helps, but we'd rather not put you through quite a lot of effort and you go, it didn't work. So why that, I really don't know. But again, it suggests that there is something that I ask people to do, which most people can do, multiple sorting at the same time, you know, but if you can't, you can't, you know. Everybody else, fine, you know. And some people, it's always great, you know, over the years I've kept sort of statistics, and there's about, there's about 20% get it completely accurate. There's another 30% will get, say, 7 out of 8. There's another group which will get 6 out of 8. Again, 4 out of 4 is chance. So they're doing better than chance, at least, you know. And usually what I say is, if you keep practicing, again, what we can do in a weekend is just so much time engaging the brain. If you go out there and, you know, I mean, if you've got clients, you know, like I said, in the early days of NLP, we would sometimes use the class as a chance to play for our benefit. You know, clients won't necessarily know if you do a little exploring for your benefit, you know. I'm just running a small survey, did you, you know, and then you can, you know, if they're hiring you for an hour of 2 hours of therapy time, you know, and you use 3 minutes or 4 minutes for a little benefit to the next patient. Basically, you know, the better you get, you're paying it forward to, you know, the next people you see. You know, so some of my students write to me or ring me up, send me emails. They they start describing all sorts of successes they've had, and I'm really glad about that. You know, one of my students, Carol, I mean, every time she gets in touch, it's something else that's gone really, really well. So practice.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's the
You
answer
that?
for everything.
Oh,
practice.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
if you think about it, how did, you know, there was a time when John Grinder, the guy who'd been a captain in the military, who'd left the military, found the money to do a year of postgraduate at MIT, met the famous George Miller, you know, briefly met Chomsky, and was lucky enough to, but I mean, there are things he didn't know until he started hanging out with Richard Bandler, you know. And again, there's one thing I know about Richard is that he can get incredibly curious about how something works, you know. And I can remember we were co-teaching back again in 1987, and he had always been a musician, but they just started making variations on the electric piano with a computer that could make other noises. So, you know, there were quite a few electric pianos that sounded like pianos. Some of them sounded a bit like organs, but, you know, they didn't have too many sound effects. And I can remember it was in the 2 or 3 days before the training, Richard said, "Come on, we're going to go to a music shop." And he picked up a thing called an Epsonic, which is one of the early versions of electric piano. Well, somehow or another, we didn't get the instruction book. And a lot of people would go, you know, and we have to go all the way back to, you know, we have to make the car journey and find, no, Richard stayed up all night trying things out, right? He stayed awake for something like 6, 7, 8 hours, right? Because I know, because I went to bed. You know, we were until we all went to the hotel. I was actually at his house, which was very nice. He had a place in San Diego, but he also had a place in San Francisco where Paula and his son and adopted daughter stayed, and I was just tagged along, you know. But he sat up all night exploring, trying different things. Now, that's unusual. You know, most people would give up, but Richard wanted to be able to play it. Wanted to be able to make it do the things that it did, you know. So he just kept trying things, and you know, that's, I think, not just a metaphor. It's actually a very good attitude, you know, and maybe even explains how he got to discover the things, you know. Obviously, they benefited from having each other to bounce ideas off, you know, and there were ideas around before NLP. One of the notions, I mean, you could say, well, I'm going to deliberately model somebody, but in fact, that exists before NLP comes along in a thing called deep trance identification, you know, and a lot of training in the martial arts, in rifle shooting, in drawing and composition, they can be the result of deep transidentification. The tradition in art of furniture making, or any of the creative industries, of somebody having an apprentice, and the apprentice does things, sometimes the routine work, but they get a chance to be around the exemplar when the exemplar is doing what they do, so hopefully saying, I want to be like them, So I think it's worth remembering always that in some ways there's a lot of things that were around before NLP. What NLP did was systematize and accelerate and make them more achievable, right? Make them more efficient even, whether, I've been lucky in that I've never met Milton Erickson, but I've met at least a dozen people who all do their version of Milton Erickson. And there was one guy I found, he wasn't even teaching, but his version of Milton I thought was uncanny. So I spent the next 3 weeks copying him. And I won't do it now, my throat's a little shy. Although Milton used his slight vocal impediment to effect, didn't he?
Yes.
When he had the degree of paralysis, it produced the slight distortion in his voice, in his vocal cords, as well as he couldn't move his jaw as much as, so I think he sometimes, he had difficulty with sh sounds, S and sh, S and there are technical names for these. The S by itself is a sibilant. S, when it's mushy, like an F, is a fricative. And you can tell a fricative because F is one. So the word for fricative has one in it. Oh, by the way, that was something else that I did. I did it just for my own entertainment. But I would see if I could help change people's submodalities by changing the quality of my voice. Mm. So, for example, can you make something more in focus? And yes, you can. You have to. This was before we'd got round to DHE. I like to think some of DHE was from conversations that Richard and I had, because we'd be sitting around in between classes, trying not to be too bored, we were having fun, and sometimes he would tell me things, which again was always interesting for me, because he'd fill in bits of the history that I didn't know. But I like the idea that both the training should be playful, and people working with other people should be in good spirits and playful, and I think if you get better, it shows in a general way, I was talking about one of my students, Carol. I think she'd say that the first year she was seeing clients, patients, there was always a degree of, how am I going to, what I do? But again, I think that the way that you teach people to handle the unexpected is by saying, look, it's not a question of finding which of the 4 or 5 step techniques you've got and applying only them. if I have a criticism for the school of training that's an offer now in Australia by Tad James and this other lady, is the people come out of it being very good at the timeline. But that's just about the only thing they offer people. Whatever the problem is, it's going to be one of the 4 or 5 things you can do in the timeline, right? There's never anything else. So, you know, God knows it's hard enough convincing, for instance, some doctors, some psychiatrists, that what NLP's got has any value. You know, one of the things I like to, because I've taught, I hope, enough medical people, is to join with them in saying, these are, first, there's a whole range of other things you might, treatments that you might explore. And even then, you might have to combine some of what this and some of this to make a new treatment that is right for this person, you know. It shouldn't be that you make them fit the, you know, there's a joke used sometimes in problem solving. If you've only got a hammer, everything is a nail. Yeah. You know. There's never a screwdriver or glue or carving it all from one piece or, you know, joinery. You know, it used to be that people made drawers that didn't need a lot of glue because you made what are called dovetail, like the tail of a bird, the dove tail. So you would do this, and then the shape of the wood made it a join. And all of these things, you know, they're all skills if you've got the time. I mean, sometimes you don't have the time, you have to do something quick. But I've in my time allowed my own, first my awareness of lots of different things. As I said, I had done 8 or 9 years of different kinds of humanistic psychology before NLP came along. And then we've had the various things that have happened in NLP, you know. Right now there's a new thing called havening. And havening to me seems to be one of a number of methods that helps the bit in the brain called the amygdala handle information. There was a brief flurry of interest in 1989, 1990 in NME circles for treating phobias with juggling. Because essentially you're getting the right brain and the left brain to communicate across the midbrain. Then there was the eye movement desensitization that Fran Shapiro says she developed, although I understand John Grinder had something to say about that because he was teaching something very similar before she came forward, and she used to work for him in his office. So did she pick it up and then forget where she collected it from? But anyway, there's a whole school out there of left and right hemisphere tracking with the eyes. Havening, as you know, one of the responses is to do this. Not this and not this, but both together. And I don't know all of it. I haven't, I think, kept up with all the detail. But I would say that people doing NLP could afford to at least look into it, you know, because it might be that one day nothing else works, but they hate to see the client go away without something, you know. So I'm all for adventure. and responsibility.
Mhm.
Now I've got a clock looking at me that says 4:07.
Yes, it's about 2 hours already.
That's 2 hours already. Yeah.
Yes.
Will that be enough now?
Thank you.
Time flies.
Yes.
Just listening to you, it's absolutely amazing,
Yeah.
Eric. You really share everything, and everything is one topic is more interesting than the next. And wow,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Eric,
Yeah.
for all the I think we explored just the tip of many icebergs, but this is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Maybe like with Richard and Milton and so on, there'll be enough there to watch it at least more than once. You know, I mean, because I don't know. But again, a class, you know, should be memorable, and you know. So until the next time, I guess.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Eric,
And
thank you so much.
All right.
Absolutely amazing.
Okay. Now, I had a friend tell me yesterday that you can make it stop, or I can make it stop. Which is best? Which is the
we can make it with no
We are
problem.
going to
Yeah.
make it stop.
right.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye bye, Eric.
Bye.